Off the western coast of Java, a single mountain of fire prepares to rewrite the map of an entire region. In only a handful of minutes, an island that has stood for centuries will vanish from every chart on Earth. Across the Sunda Strait, tens of thousands of people will lose their lives before the next dawn ever arrives. Yet, at the very heart of this catastrophe, one small steamship refuses to flee from the approaching wall of water. Her captain makes a choice so strange that maritime academies still study and teach his decision even today. Instead of racing towards safety, he turns his vessel and aims her bow directly into the heart of the wave. To survive the night, he issues an order that sounds almost merciless, yet it will preserve 100 lives. How can a fragile steamer survive a force that erases whole islands and hurls warships deep into the jungle? What does a single captain see in those last minutes that makes him attack the sea rather than escape from it? Official records speak only of disaster, rarely explaining the cold logic that turns sheer terror into rescue. To grasp this night, we must return to a world that still believes the strait is calm, gentle, and routine. We must meet the ship, her crew, and the man who chooses unbending physics over fear as the world collapses. The year is 1883, and the Dutch East Indies form one of the busiest trading regions in the entire colonial world. Spice routes, coffee plantations, and colonial harbors bind together islands scattered across warm tropical seas. The port of Anjer rests on the western edge of Java, a familiar waypoint for ships crossing the narrow strait. Steamers, such as the Loudon, carry passengers and cargo between the islands on schedules that seldom ever change. Aboard her travel European officials, their families, local laborers, and merchants who know these waters well. For nearly all of them, this is an ordinary voyage, no different from the many they have already completed. The Sunda Strait is a slender channel of water that narrowly divides the two great islands of Java and Sumatra. At its center rises Krakatoa, an island volcano that has slumbered quietly for almost 2 entire centuries. Sailors treat it as a landmark, a green silhouette marking the midpoint of their long and familiar passage. Few imagine that beneath its peaceful slopes, tremendous pressure has been building for uncountable silent years. In the preceding weeks, the mountain begins to stir, releasing tall columns of steam and distant rumbling sounds. Curious travelers even sail close to admire it, treating the early eruptions as a harmless natural wonder. The colonial newspapers describe the activity with fascination instead of fear, expecting it to fade away soon. Life in the ports continues as always, with markets, harbors, and warehouses humming through every long day. The rhythm of trade feels permanent, as though these routes and towns will surely endure for many centuries. Captain Johann Lindemann knows the strait intimately, having guided ships through its currents for many long years. He is a disciplined man, respected for his steady judgment and his refusal to gamble with the lives aboard. When the Loudon departs Anjer, the crossing seems routine, just another short passage beneath a hazy gray sky. But the haze is no ordinary weather, for fine ash already drifts across the water from the restless mountain. A strange tension hangs over the sea. That morning, a quiet warning the seasoned crew cannot fully explain. Still, the voyage proceeds, the engines turning steadily as the coastline of Java slips slowly into the haze. None aboard yet understand that they are sailing into the center of one of history's greatest natural events. As the Loudon enters Lampong Bay, the captain notices movements in the water that should not be possible. The surface churns and bubbles, as though the sea itself were boiling beneath the heavy steel hull of the ship. Far below the keel, the volcano's hidden chamber is already deforming the ocean floor with tremendous force. Lindemann senses that something far larger than a simple eruption is unfolding directly beneath his vessel. Rather than steering toward the pier, He gives his first crucial order and drops anchor well out from shore. A small boat is lowered and sent toward the coast to discover whether the harbor can still receive the ship. The scouts return with grim news, for waves already batter the shoreline, and the ports lie broken in ruins. They report that the lighthouse at Angier has fallen silent, swallowed beneath the relentless battering surf. Every familiar landmark along the coast has vanished, leaving the crew without a single point of reference. The Loudon is now trapped between an awakening volcano and a coastline that offers no safe refuge at all. There is no harbor to enter and no sheltered bay to hide within, only open water and the rising fury ahead. Lindemann realizes the world he has navigated for years is being unmade within the span of a single night. The captain weighs his choices carefully, knowing that every decision now carries the weight of many lives. Then the light itself begins to change, as a strange darkness creeps across the sky in the middle of the day. The sun vanishes completely, swallowed by towering clouds of ash that smother every last trace of daylight. An impenetrable blackness settles over the ship, so total that the crew can scarcely see their own hands. From this darkness falls a rain unlike anything these experienced sailors have ever witnessed in their lives. Ash and water blend together in the air, settling onto the decks as a thick, heavy substance, like wet cement. The mud is warm and acrid, a strange mixture of pulverized rock and seawater carried up from the deep below. Within a short time, a layer almost 15 centimeters deep coats every exposed surface of the laboring vessel. The weight is far more than a discomfort, for it begins to disturb the delicate balance of the entire ship. As mud heaps upon the upper decks, the center of gravity climbs, threatening to capsize her at any moment. A single large wave against the side could now roll the Loudon completely over before anyone could respond. The captain grasps the danger at once and orders the whole crew up onto the decks to battle the rising mud. In total darkness, the sailors begin the desperate labor of shoveling the heavy sludge back over the railings. Buckets and shovels pass from hand to hand as the men form straining chains across the slippery wooden decks. Each load they cast overboard is replaced almost at once by the ceaseless downpour from the blackened sky. They toil amid choking clouds of sulfur that sting their eyes and burn deep within their straining lungs. It is a brutal race against time, with the survival of every soul aboard resting upon their fading endurance. Then the night grows stranger still, as an eerie blue light begins to flicker and dance along the rigging. The masts and ropes glow with a ghostly radiance born from the immense static charge filling the heavy air. Sailors name this phenomenon St. Elmo's Fire, a sight long woven into the deep superstitions of the sea. To many of the local crew members, the glowing ropes appear to be spirits sent to claim the doomed vessel. Terrified by what they believe are supernatural forces, a number of them abandon their posts in pure panic. Some sailors fall to their knees, convinced that the glowing masts mark the final hour of their short lives. Even the stokers themselves flee the engine room, leaving the Loudon without the steady power that keeps her alive. Without firemen feeding the boilers, the ship risks losing all propulsion at the very worst possible moment. A vessel without engines in such a sea is little more than driftwood, awaiting the mercy of the wild waves. The captain understands that fear has now become as dangerous as the volcano itself in this critical hour. He moves among the men with a lantern, his steady voice cutting through the terror like a blade of cold iron. He reminds them that the ship is their only refuge, and that to abandon their duty is to abandon life itself. With stern commands and unshakable resolve, he drives the frightened men back down toward their stations. Discipline, he knows, is the only thin line separating order from a chaos that would surely doom them all. Slowly, the boilers roar back to life, and the Loudon recovers the precious power held within her engines. Steam pressure rises again within the iron furnaces, and the heartbeat of the vessel returns to the dark. The Loudon lives once more, yet the true ordeal of this night has still not begun to reveal its full shape. Hour upon hour, the crew fights the falling mud, while the volcano builds toward its final great convulsion. Time loses all meaning in the endless blackness, with no horizon, no sun, and no stars to mark its slow passage. The air thickens, the rumbling deepens, and the sea grows more restless with each passing hour of the night. The passengers in the hold pray in many languages, their voices blending into a single low murmur of fear. Among them are entire families who boarded expecting a quiet passage toward the safety of some distant harbor. Now they sit in the dark belly of the ship, listening to the groans of the hull and the roar far beyond it. On deck, the weary crew strains to hear the sea, listening for the change their captain has warned them about. Lindemann studies the water by faint lantern light, watching for any shift in the rhythm of the restless waves. He cannot see the mountain, yet he feels the strait gathering itself for something far worse than before. The captain cannot save them now by fleeing, for nowhere in this ruined strait remains for any ship to flee. He can only ready his vessel for the moment when the sea at last unleashes its full and most terrible power. The rumbling beneath the sea grows into a continuous roar that the sailors can feel within their very bones. Lightning born of the towering ash cloud splits the darkness with brief and ghastly flashes of pale light. Each flash reveals a sea heaving with unnatural energy, a vision the exhausted crew will never manage to forget. The mud keeps falling, and the men keep shoveling, their arms burning, their hope thinning with each hour. Yet the Loudon endures, held together by discipline, by stubbornness, and by the will of one steady captain. And so the long night drags onward, each hour stretching into an eternity of darkness, ash, and sheer dread. Then, in the deepest hour of that night, the volcano finally surrenders to the pressure it has long held. Krakatoa erupts with a violence so immense that the human mind can scarcely measure or fully comprehend it. The sound races across thousands of kilometers, ranking among the loudest events ever recorded in history. The blast tears the island apart, flinging vast quantities of rock and ash high into the trembling night sky. In the bay where the Loudon waits, the sea suddenly begins to behave in a manner that defies all human reason. The water retreats with astonishing speed, draining away from the hull and exposing the bare seabed far below. Sailors stare in disbelief as the ocean pulls backward, revealing ground no living eye should ever behold. The captain recognizes the sign instantly, for the sea is gathering its strength to return as a vast wall. He has perhaps only 2 short minutes to decide the fate of every passenger and crew member aboard his vessel. The choice is stark and merciless: to stay at anchor or to cut the chain and steer toward the coming wave. Not far away, the military gunboat Barrow confronts the very same impossible decision in the same darkness. Her crew chooses to wait at anchor, trusting their heavy vessel to ride out whatever the sea may deliver. Days afterward, the Barrow will be found far inland, carried deep into the dense jungle by the immense surge. Her entire crew is lost, a silent testament to the fate awaiting any ship that merely waits in its place. But Lindemann makes the opposite choice, refusing to let his ship become a passive victim of the rising sea. He orders full steam ahead and commands the helmsman to aim the bow straight into the fast-approaching wall. Ahead of them rises a mountain of water, towering like a building of 12 stories against the black sky. To flee from such a wave would mean being struck broadside and rolled over within a single fatal instant. Only by meeting it head-on can the Loudon ever hope to climb the wave, instead of being crushed beneath it. Yet the mud upon her decks still threatens her balance, lifting her center of gravity to a perilous height. The captain needs heavy weight, low in the hull to counter the thick sludge clinging to her upper structures. And so, he gives the order that history will long remember, both for its harshness and its cold brilliance. He commands that all 111 passengers be sealed below within the darkness of the lower hold. The order is not cruelty, but pure physics, for human weight set down low will help steady the trembling ship. By driving the passengers downward, the captain lowers the center of gravity against the heavy upper mud. The hatches are sealed, the passengers shut in darkness, and the Loudon turns at last to face her reckoning. The wall of water surges forward, and the bow climbs at an angle that seems utterly impossible to survive. The propellers spin uselessly in the open air as the ship ascends the steep face of the towering black wave. For one suspended instant, the Loudon hangs near the very crest, balanced between salvation and complete ruin. Then she tips over the summit and slides down the far side, still intact after the impossible long climb. The wave rushes on beneath her toward the distant coast, where it will reshape the land beyond recognition. The Loudon survives the very strike that destroys harbors, towns, and nearly every other vessel caught nearby. But her ordeal is far from finished, for she now drifts blind through hours of suffocating darkness and ash. No stars guide her path, no coastline appears, only the endless black sea and the ringing after the chaos. The crew can only wait, exhausted and stunned, as their battered ship floats through the ruined long night. The passengers remain sealed below, unaware whether the silence above means safety or some final disaster. The captain keeps his post through the darkness, unwilling to rest until he knows his ship will surely hold. The long hours pass without measure, the vessel drifting through a void where sky and sea have become as one. When dawn at last finally breaks, the weary survivors behold a world transformed almost beyond all recognition. Where Krakatoa once proudly stood, much of the island has simply vanished, dissolved into the open morning sky. An entire mountain has been erased from the face of the earth, leaving only sea and drifting clouds in its place. The crew stares out at the empty horizon, struggling to believe that so vast a landmark is now truly gone. The water itself is no longer water, but a thick field of floating pumice stretching toward the far horizon. A layer of porous rock nearly 2 full meters thick covers the surface, choking the sea in every direction. The Loudon must now literally grind her way forward, chewing through the stone to make any progress at all. Her engines strain hard against the floating rock as she pushes slowly toward the distant safety of a harbor. Hour by hour, she crawls slowly onward, a wounded vessel crossing a sea that has been turned entirely alien. The pumice scrapes endlessly along her battered hull, a constant grinding song that fills the exhausted silence. Around her float the remnants of a shattered world, fragments of timber and ash, upon the wide, pale gray sea. The sky above remains dim and heavy. The sun, a faint disk behind thick veils of dust, circling the whole earth. For weeks to come, that drifting ash will paint vivid red sunsets across distant skies all over the world. But the crew of the Loudon cannot yet know how far the echoes of this single night will eventually travel. They know only that they are alive, and that their captain's strange gamble has somehow carried them through. At last, the hatches are opened, and the passengers emerge, blinking into the dim and altered morning daylight. They climb from the darkness expecting ruin, yet they find themselves whole, shaken but spared from harm. 111 souls who were sealed down below have survived a night that erased an entire island. The decks around them are caked in hardened mud, the rigging scorched, the once proud ship a battered shell. Slowly, the Loudon works herself free of the pumice and finds open water leading toward the port of Batavia. Her course takes her past a coastline utterly remade, where familiar towns and harbors have ceased to exist. The strait the crew once knew so well has become a stranger, its shores rewritten in a single violent night. As the ship nears Batavia, word of the great catastrophe has already spread across the shaken colonial world. The harbor receives a vessel that looks more like a ghost than a ship, gray with ash and bent by the sea. Yet from her deck walk 111 living passengers, every soul entrusted to her brought home. The survival of the Loudon stands in stark contrast to the silence of the many ships that did not return. In a disaster that takes tens of thousands of lives, her story becomes a rare and truly astonishing exception. The eruption reshapes the geography of the strait, sinking old islands and raising new ones from the deep. It also reshapes human knowledge, driving scientists to study the power and the reach of such great events. Observers around the globe record the strange skies, linking distant nations through a shared natural wonder. The waves born that night are measured on distant coastlines thousands of kilometers from the vanished mountain. For the people of the strait, the world they once knew has ended, and a long age of rebuilding now begins. Villages are slowly raised again on changed shores, and the survivors carry the memory of that night for life. As for Captain Johann Lindemann, his bold maneuver earns him recognition and a cross of gold for his courage. He is honored as the man who saved his ship and all her passengers by sailing straight into certain death. Yet the toll of that night does not pass with the dawn, for the strain he carried never fully leaves him. Only 2 short years later, his heart gives way, worn down by the immense burden of those unforgettable hours. The man who refused to flee the sea is undone in the end by the silent weight of all that he had endured. His name endures in the academies, where his choice is studied by sailors who will never face such a night. The ship herself is eventually repaired, but the marks of that crossing are never entirely erased from her. Her anchor, twisted and bent by the fury of that night, survives as a relic of an almost impossible escape. That battered anchor now rests within a museum in Jakarta, a silent witness to a single captain's daring. Visitors gaze upon the warped iron and struggle to imagine the force that bent such heavy metal like soft wire. It stands as physical proof of the night, when one man chose to attack the sea rather than flee before it. The story of the Loudon reveals how thin the line can be between catastrophe and survival upon the open sea. The eruption of Krakatoa becomes one of the most studied natural events of the entire 19th century. Its ash circles the planet, and for years afterward the very air carries the memory of that distant blast. Scientists chart the pressure waves that travel around the world several times before finally fading away. The disaster gives birth to new fields of study, shaping how later generations understand such great forces. And yet, beyond the science and the statistics, one human story rises above the vast scale of the great loss. It is the story of a captain who, in the darkest hour, trusted reason over panic and steel over raw fear. By turning toward the danger instead of away, he transformed near-certain doom into an unlikely deliverance. The Loudon sailed into the heart of the storm and emerged carrying every life that had been placed aboard. Such moments reveal that, even amid overwhelming destruction, human resolve can still alter a single fate. Explore more of history's great upheavals and discover how courage and consequence shape our shared past.